Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain Blended podcast and founder of the Blended Pledge. And I'm thrilled to be partnering with the team at OptiLogic once again. Now, I've interviewed Don on Let's Talk Supply Chain, so go check out episode 376 for his unique take on redefining the principles of supply chain design and bringing some much needed fun to the industry. And then Don and I partnered with C.H. Robinson for a LinkedIn Live a little earlier this year as well. And we talked all about their own journey with supply chain design. So I'm excited to be doing it all again with Don today. Now, supply chain design is the foundation of strategic planning, right? From assessing costs to managing time, it can explore every type of decision around the structure and policies of your supply chain. And as supply chain becomes more end customer focused, good design is increasingly becoming a competitive advantage. But modeling and designing supply chains is complicated. So much data, so many variables, and so little time. So, is generative AI the answer? Well, Dawn and I are going to be exploring that today. We'll be diving into the challenges of supply chain design and the skills needed to leverage it. We'll be talking about the huge potential and the most critical problems supply chain design will help solve in the coming year. But we're also going to shine a light on OptiLogic's supply chain design AI assistant, the aptly named Leapfrog, and sharing how it's going to help everyone to become a better supply chain designer. Now, if you have any questions, make sure to put those in the comments because we're going to take all your questions close to the end of the show and we want to hear from you. We also want to hear from you as to where you're tuning in from. So put that in the comments. We'll give you a shout out during the show. But really sit back, watch, learn. Don is going to bring so many valuable insights to everybody in supply chain and really bring together what you need to know. All right, without further ado, we need to bring up Don. Don, how you doing?
Good, Sarah. How are you?
Good. It's so great to see you. And this is such an important topic. Everybody's talking about AI. Everybody's talking about how to redesign their supply chains.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that we're diving into this and really giving them tangible things to think about over the next for 2025, really, right?
Yeah, for sure, Sarah. Well, thanks for having me again. We've got a nice repartee going on. I'm looking forward to continuing this discussion. And, the objective here is to be of value for the folks that have tuned in and hopefully poke and provide some thought or food for thought. There are more questions than answers in this one, but you're quite right. Everybody is talking about it, and not a lot of people are actually doing it. So that is something we're trying to chip away at ourselves.
Yeah. So if there's tons of questions, we're going to get a ton of questions in the comments. We'll be able to get to those later. Plus, we even have an ebook for everybody, which I think is amazing. But for anybody who doesn't know you, Don, can you tell everybody who you are, what you do, and what does OptiLogic do?
Well, for the 2 or 3 people who haven't heard of my name before, sorry in advance. My name's Don Hicks. I get to be the CEO of OptiLogic. OptiLogic's been around over 5 years now. We provide software and services to help people and their companies be successful with supply chain design. There's a ton of things that people are struggling with right now. We don't do most of those things. We don't manage your supply chain. We don't run your inventory. We're not a consultancy, but we do have the biggest collection of expertise in supply chain design in the world concentrated in our group. We focus on that and we stick to our knitting. Prior to all of this, I started and ran a company called Llamasoft for about 20 years. And then when I took off to try to do new things, they went one direction and I went another one. And now here I am back in the middle of everything with supply chain
Awesome.
with the best team in the world.
Well, and supply chain takes a hold of you and you just cannot shake it, right? So anyone who knows you, Don, knows how passionate you are about supply chain design. And
Sure.
It is a growing focus area for businesses looking to take a more proactive approach, but it certainly isn't easy. So can you talk to us about why modeling and designing supply chains is really so complex? Like, what are the biggest challenges that folks are facing?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of different things here that make this, I would say, challenging to pull off. There are parts of it that are complicated, and then there are parts of it are easy. And I want to split this out. The field about supply chain design in a sort of business context, it's in itself, it can be very difficult because what we're trying to do is pull together data from across the supply chain, which is usually held in different systems, so TMSs and WMSs and the ERP system, and then some of the data is over here and some of the data is there, and it's not a surprise to the people listening to this to realize it's not all in one island. We're trying, but as soon as you make changes or you acquire a new company, it's a reset. It's very difficult to pull all of the data into one model and make the data harmonized so you can then play with it and analyze it.
Right.
A lot of interest in that one. Now, that is actually what folks that are trying to do in planning and visibility. But in design, we're trying to do something even more complicated. We take the current state of the model, the current state of your end-to-end supply chain, and what we're trying to help you do is answer, what could it look like? What happens if I make this big change? And that means envisioning something that you're not doing at all today. Mm-hmm. Design really is defined by looking ahead at the future and looking at the what ifs and the possibilities. And we use a bunch of fancy mathematical algorithms like simulation and optimization and machine learning and things like that. But whenever we talk about the future, we don't have data about the future. And I'm making this point because this is going to be one of the themes and one of the sticking points of that holds AI up in this field. When we try to do a what if, we're doing a future state, a change, and we won't have much data. In some cases, we don't have any data about that. So we have to solve the missing data problem and put in and mock up or model on out what's the data I need for new lane rates or new sources and new suppliers. And then the last part about this, and this is actually a really human aspect to it. At the end of this, you don't get an answer. You get, here's what will happen. And our decision makers have to then turn around and balance service and financials and system risk. And that balancing act is really, really hard. If all these things work out, if you can find a way to get higher service at lower cost and lower risk, there's nothing to talk about. But in the real world that senior executives are dealing with, they know it's trade-offs and compromises. And you try to use design technology to deal yourself in to a better position, one that better fits the environment you're facing. The last part about this is that things never settle down. You know, we're only worried here at OptiLogic if the world settles down, becomes static and predictable, because then it won't be that hard to do design. But I don't know when that happens. Okay, so we're always dealing with change. We never settle in on a design. We're always designing. And our customers and our executives are really coming to this mindset that design itself is actually a verb, designing, and it's the process of thinking and the process of articulating out contrasting elements. It's that striving to envision a better supply chain that gives you all the value, because you'll never just cross the finish line and lock it down. As soon as you get it done, the situation changes. Yeah. So we like to talk a lot about design as a capability, a long-term capability that your company needs to evolve to bring on there. And then ask yourself, well, if I don't evolve that capability, but my competitor does, what's going to happen? And the answer is, you're going to be their dinner.
Well, and also, I like what you're saying too, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily going to be a perfect choice. But you are going to be able to have the choices, and you're going to be able to weigh the options between risk and cost, et cetera, to figure out which is the right pathway to you. And I love that we're talking about the fact that this is individualized to organizations.
Yes.
Because traditionally, right, so supply chain has been thought of really as a whole, and how people really handle supply chain should be the same across the board. Well, it's not. It's like us as people. You know, what works for you, Don, doesn't necessarily work for me, and I got to figure out what my individual methodology is that will work for me. And it's the same with supply chain and organizations. But the fact that it's a journey, not a destination, and it's not the perfect answer that you're seeking, but the right choice for your organization is another mindset shift. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah, appreciate it.
So let's talk about introduce us to AI concepts and terms. Now, AI is not something that just happened yesterday. People have been talking about AI for a long time. Generative AI is newer, but I feel like we're still up in the air as to whether we should do it and whether it's a good thing for us or what does it actually mean. So can you introduce some of the concepts and terms so we can sort of wrap our head around it for the conversation today?
Sure. Let me set define a few things to help facilitate the conversation. And this is going to be an incomplete conversation about this. First of all, AI is such a broad term. It encompasses so many different other micro terms, in some cases, completely different techniques. It's not new. It has been around for decades. There's been steady progress on it in the field of a variety of different algorithms. But what happened over the last 10 years, and especially 5 or 6 years ago, was the technology and the techniques kind of got to this inflection point, steadily making incremental progress until suddenly it feels like there was a big breakthrough. And this happens in technology where suddenly it can do things that the general public didn't think was possible. So artificial intelligence really relates to all of the different computational and computer science techniques being used to solve decision-making problems, thinking, to do what humans do in their head. In our field specifically, there's a lot of focus on what we would call generative AI, which is using these sorts of basic technologies to then create what looks like new content from existing content that's out there. A subset of generative AI is called large learning models, or large language models, I should say. And large language models focus on drawing from all of the data about words and sentences and language. And literally an LLM, when you give it an input, it goes back and it looks at the neural nets of what it has extracted from all of the language it has accessible. And it says, I'm going to start with this word and then this word and then this word. And it puts together a sentence that it thinks would respond well to the sentence that came in. And people really get confused about this because the sentence that it kicks out, it turns out, is remarkable. And it sounds like you're having a conversation with a potentially another human.
Right.
But you're not. There is no thinking there. It is simply putting the words together to give you what it thinks might fit what you sent it. It's really important. Large language models are not smart. They just sound smart. And one of the things that we've been really, as we've seen this unfold, it's a lot like pundits in the supply chain industry. A lot of these people, there are some very smart people, but there's a lot of folks that just sound smart. They chop the words up together, they throw it back in a word salad, and they see, is this tasty for you? Algorithms are even better at that than humans are. So there are some amazing applications for this, but there's also some other stuff that it's simply wrong for. And we in the industry are trying to sort all of that out. I'll pivot to, there's a whole other host of associated technologies around machine learning, classification, sorting. There's a lot of other techniques that have been used and continue to be used in the supply chain space and in the operations research space. I think we're going to focus today a lot more on LLMs and where this is fitting in because it's sort of captured the imagination. But again, it's only a segment of AI as a whole. And I chuckle every time people say, oh, we've got an AI platform. We're just going to, throw all our problems on there. Well, good luck with that. That's like saying, I've got access to math.
Right.
What are you going to do with it? But it's been, we're sorting it out.
And how you take action and how you do exceptions management as well, but also understanding what is coming at you and looking at it in a different way for you to be able to reorganize that to make sure that it works for you and not just taking it verbatim. And I'm glad that you said that because a lot of people do. And again, this is something that we are still working on, and there are applications for this that we probably don't even know
For sure.
today that are going to come up in the future as well. So talk to me about the impact that complexity is having on an organization's ability to really make progress with their supply chain design. I mean, we hear time and again that one of the reasons tech integrations take so long is partly due to time-strapped IT departments. I mean, change management is also a big part of that, but we know there are talent shortages across the industry. How big of an issue is that for supply chain right now? And supply
Well,
chain?
yeah, I mean the talent shortage is bad and going to only get worse, and that plays into this. I think let me back up one and state axiom number one about this field, and that is artificial intelligence and all the associated technologies are tools. They're tools to be used that can help support people. But we're in no danger of humans being replaced from all of these businesses. We are absolutely in danger, in the best way possible, of humans being enhanced by the use of these. AI and all of those associated algorithms, they are enabling technologies. They support and they can be used to solve business problems, but they don't solve business problems on their own. Skynet is not here. Okay. If you're worried about it taking over, to me, that is sci-fi in the distant future. What you should be worried about is, given that this is a newly productive enabling technology, how can I get a leg up? How can I've got my existing range of problems, assume they're all there. Which of these might now be more tractable? Where can I throw an LLM at this to solve this one problem or to help my people do this thing? It's a different mindset, but unfortunately or not, we're not escaping the basic fundamental problems that you've had.
Right.
So, when we talk about dealing with complexity, you touched on several really important issues. The one in the center is, how do we solve problems, whether it's planning problems and making good planning decisions, or where we live, which is design and accomplishing design projects in a timely manner and a high quality with as few, enabling my limited people to do that. But the complexity part there, upstream of that, if you're going to use software, you have to install it. You have to get the license. You have to get it set up. And indeed, IT organizations are under siege constantly. I am very sympathetic to the IT organizations that are out there who are more and more, their main job is protect my company from bad actors. And then they're saying, well, how do I set up the infrastructure, which is compute heavy? And last year you told me you wanted to run a bunch of optimization software. Now I got to get even more hardware to do this. These IT departments are under siege already. And if there wasn't a final nail in the coffin of workstation and enterprise legacy architecture, it's this one. Companies cannot manage and set up the hardware themselves in general. There's Amazon can and Microsoft can, but most everybody else cannot. So if you're still trying to put these on-premise and these enterprise kinds of installs on there, all you're doing is adding to the misery of your poor IT department. We've focused on going cloud native from the very beginning, and it just solves all of these other problems. The deployment time for our software is about 500 milliseconds. So everybody out there can go in 500 milliseconds, because Sarah, if you're so intrigued, as I know you will be when we get talking about Leapfrog, you'll be able to go make an account and we provision an entire stack for you on the fly. You can't do that. You can't push that on the IT departments that are out there. That's how fast it's going. And if your other technologies are not going that fast, you really need to rethink that.
So I don't know if everybody caught that, Don, but you can actually go there right now and set up an account, a free account. And is that fair to say?
It is a free, everybody is entitled to a free personal account. We would say non-commercial use. If you're going to go off and make millions of dollars, we hope that you'll actually get a license and subscribe to the software. But we believe that people need to have a personal account because people change jobs, things happen. And this is getting at that talent problem, which is, the existing business models that are out there have caused companies to limit the number of people that have access to the software. In the short term, that helps you with budget management. But in the long term, we in the design space mortgaged our future by making it harder and harder for people to get into this. We must open it up so that everybody has a long-term access to this. And so everybody has personal accounts with,
and I think
that
also helps with upskilling as well, because you can go in there and see what it's capable of, personally and on your own, and then come up with innovative ideas. If you're able to go in and just sort of play around with it on your own, you can come up with all sorts of innovative ideas for your team. So just so everybody knows, the link to all of that is in the comments. We're providing that to you in the comments as we do this conversation, because we want you to go and either check out the demo or set up that free account. Now, before we get to the next set of this discussion, I do want to give a shout out, because we've got a whole bunch of people on my personal LinkedIn. D-Raj, we've got Andrea, Laura, Eric. We've also got Wendy and Mohammed over on my personal. And I just want to say they've got some really good points around who's using AI and autonomy in different industries, but also related to supply chain, if you want to go and check that out. All right, Don. So
excellent.
It's complicated, right? It's a commitment. But investing in supply chain design is really worthwhile, because the industry as a whole continues to be tough. Like, we're facing disruption after disruption. Our supply chains are being tested every day. And we know that many organizations still don't have the infrastructures in place to be as agile and resilient and maybe even sustainable as they need to be. So talk to us about how that supply chain design can help. Like, what are the most critical problems that supply chain design will address in the coming year?
Sure. So, and I'm going to tie this, I'm going to try to bring this back in with the AI intersection as well, because we could talk about design for weeks and not even really make a dent in it. So, in terms of the problems, think of it this way. All of these companies, all of the folks that are out there listening to the podcast, you guys are running and managing supply chains, and you're trying to do the best you can with the supply chain that you have. Okay. You can't just consider all possibilities. You have the facilities that you have today. You've got the processes that you have the products that you have, and you have expected demand, and you got to make the best of it. And all of those decisions are around, I consider those to be planning decisions. That's the bulk of where you're going to spend your time and your effort, making decisions about what to do today, tomorrow, next week, even later on in this year. Those are we call it doing the best with what you got. But you have a limitation, because you really can't stop and think about, what if this was different? How would all of my planning decisions get made? We talk about your planning efficiency horizon is limited by your system. You'll never get any better than this horizon, this efficiency threshold, this efficiency frontier that you have with your current supply chain. You can get closer and closer, but you'll never break through the limits that are inherent in your current design. So supply chain design is a parallel capability that says, let's imagine new things. Let's imagine details about how I could change what I do in the factory floor, change my prioritization rules in the warehouse,
change where I manufacture,
where I stock. I have 2,000 SKUs that I've focused on this forward warehouse. What if I could make it 1,000? Now, it doesn't help me today. But if I can explore those changes, I can then say, well, what does that do to my efficiency frontier? It pushes it on out, and it allows planning and efficiency to then find new ways and to make that breakthrough. You'll never make the breakthroughs without designing and pushing that efficiency frontier out. Supply chain design is exactly that capability. And then the last part is this, again, these trade-off issues. What we saw was, over the course of about 15 to 20 years, an unrelenting focus on cost cutting. And I'm talking about from roughly the Y2K to roughly the pandemic time. There was an idea that the world was steadily heading towards more globalization, fewer trade barriers. We had a good handle on what the cost, what a cost basis looked like, and we could try to optimize. And we didn't see the black swan coming. We didn't see, what might disrupt it. And so what you saw is companies taking it very, very, very far, focused exclusively on cost. And if you never have a problem, you don't get punished for it. I'll use a quick example about design thinking here. Sometimes I'll talk to executives and I'll say, well, how many of you guys here drove to this session? It's in the United States, everybody drove. And then I'll say, well, how many of you people got into a car accident on the way? I hope it's none. And it's almost always none. And I say, well, how many of you paid for car insurance? Well, everybody did. I said, well, that's obviously wasted money because you didn't get into an accident. Just stop paying your car insurance and you will have saved yourself 10% or 15%. You cut costs with no punishment. That works until it doesn't, until a disruption, a fender bender, an accident. This is exactly the mindset that we got lulled into in the supply chain world, is that the consensus is smooth sailing, cut for cost, cut inventory, and we probably won't get punished for it until we did. And we're in a sweet spot right now where people and these executives in these companies still remember how disruptive and how dangerous the risky world is, even though if you take steps to reduce risk, it may mean some additional cost. Redundant suppliers, alternative suppliers, shifting my supply base out of China and into some other place that might not be as threatening in the future, or might not be inaccessible. What is this worth to your company? You need to have the capability to put a number on that so you can balance risk and finance and service of that network. Supply chain design is the only capability that lets you do that. Now, if I can, great. I got the microphone, so I'm going to stick with it for a second.
Okay. I do have a comment, but yes, keep going.
I want to stick with it because I want to bring AI into the picture. Okay. All of these technologies, and I'll just keep calling it AI, and we agree that there's a bundle of technologies, but the underpinnings is data-driven pattern recognition. Okay, this is what's so powerful. Big Iron is able to extract patterns out of groups of data and find patterns that humans are missing or couldn't possibly see because the data is so vast. Now, the data has to exist, which means we're drawing patterns from the world as it is and history and what's been happening. But the future is not the past. And so these pattern recognition algorithms are at their best when your environment is not changing, because your data set is now predictive and valid. And if things don't change outside of that, it's going to be highly, highly accurate. That sounds a lot like planning applications. When I've got my supply chain and I've got data about how it operates, and I've got my last year's history, I can pull a lot of patterns out of that, and I can automate rapidly decision-making to do better than the humans can plan. But that all assumes there's no change, and it is inherently weighted towards what happened previously. It's exceptionally bad at incorporating what might happen for which there's no data. And that's the future, and that's the things that I worry about. AI algorithms have no visibility into what's worrying me that isn't in my history, but is something I know could happen in the future. Right. These are complementary approaches. Make the best of it using planning, and we see AI as already making a big impact in there. But in design, asking AI to design a better supply chain, it doesn't know what to do with that because it doesn't think. It doesn't have scope outside of historical data. Humans have to bring that in. That's the strategy piece, alignment with what the board and the CEO needs next year and the year after, which is going to be very different from the history that got you there. That is a crucial difference, and it makes AI, quite frankly, more than a little dangerous in terms of designing your future supply chain. It may look good, but it won't be good. Now, I do have some stuff to talk about with where AI is actually tremendously important in design, but I'm going to hand you back the mic.
Yeah, because we're going to go to that question in just
Yeah.
a second. But I'm glad that you said that. And obviously, we can't feed it information for too far into the future because even we don't know that information and what that looks like. Because you said, 1 to 2 years out. I think people are even planning, 6 months out if they're lucky at the moment. And so we have to continuously feed that information as to where we want to be and what could potentially happen, right?
Well, for planning, we think of that as the time horizon for planning decisions.
Hmm.
But the fact is, the supply chain, to make big changes to it, it can take much, much longer. And
Yes, it can.
these boards and there are some very far-sighted chief executives out there that are looking at the world that is changing, and they're saying, "What is my company? How should it be organized? How should it deal with the long-term trends?" And I'll give you a couple of
Okay.
examples. In
Yeah.
in the year 2022, the population of China started to go negative in terms of growth. That means it's shrinking.
Hmm.
The population of China is predicted to fall by 50% over the next 50 years or so. By 2040, I think it is, it's going to be, it would have lost 200 million people. Now, the Chinese government has to deal with all of that. But what are the implications if you are sourcing everything from that? Is that a good idea? You know,
Sourcing, maybe selling to.
sourcing as a market. There are technologies that are shifting. What does electrification mean? When you have right now, I don't know when we're going to get autonomous self-driving vehicles.
I mean, flying cars are coming, Don.
Flying
Flying
cars are coming,
cars.
and they're very cool, but they're not going to be hauling a lot of cargo anytime soon.
Well,
But
I did have a company on the show called Airship, and they're looking to do that with containers. So it might be
well,
closer than you think.
yeah, I love it, but this is the thing. It's going to shift what you can do. It gives you
That's
another
true.
transportation mode. How does that affect my business?
Mhm.
Now, that might not change things for 5 to 10 years, but I should be thinking about it. I have to be developing contingencies. And this comes down to whether or not you care about your company surviving in the long term. And I just have to
Mhm.
call this out. There are a lot of executives who seem not to care if their company actually survives more than the next couple of years. They're like, it's too far in the future. I don't care. But the best VPs, the best C-level guys that I've come across, they feel a sense of duty. Feel a sense of stewardship that they want to leave their company in great shape for the long term.
Mhm.
And for those kinds of executives that take it seriously to serve their shareholders, they are thinking about, what does changing demographics mean? Population in Africa is going up. Population in Eastern Europe is going down. What does this mean for my company? I may
Yeah.
not be here for that, but I care what happens. There are other people who just don't care that much.
Yeah.
And guess what? Those are not great design clients. If you're
Well,
really, if you're like,
get
I'm going to
let's
get
get
mine and I'm
in
going to get out, you're not a good client for design.
all right. Well, let's get into the role that AI is going to play in supply chain
Yeah,
design. And then I want to touch on some of those positive impacts, like, like breaking it down for what executives need to know, because that's kind of the title for today. So, talk
sure.
to me about the role that AI is going to play in supply chain design. And then let's talk about the positive impacts, the things that we should be really expecting from AI to help us with in our organizations.
Sure. I want to bust it down to three main application areas that we've targeted and that we're focusing on for how AI and LLM, and in some cases other machine learning algorithms, we think are going to revolutionize and make this field much, much more service oriented, much easier to use. The first place that we focused on, quite honestly, is data manipulation.
Mm.
And what I mean by that, I'll give you the example. My vice president of engineering, Steve Summer, he's a bit of a SQL expert himself, as you might expect. A lot of our work in design is taking data from different sources and massaging it, and also getting rid of the crap. And these things cannot be fully automated.
Mhm.
It's made it that using SQL and data manipulation tools has become necessary to do a design project. But can anyone remember how to write a query to do this or how to operate that? We've focused on automating through LLMs. We've trained our algorithms, and we call it Leapfrog. We've trained Leapfrog to understand what you would say in English. Like, I want to do this. I want to find me the data that doesn't fit. Make me some new products. These kinds of things that if you remember the query, it's easy, but who can remember all that stuff? Sometimes it's very complicated. Find me all of the missing links, all of the links in my model that don't have any demand or that have demand but don't have a source or don't have a transportation. That can be really hard to do even when you're an expert. You're like pulling out the books and you're looking for code samples. Leapfrog listens to that, taps into our data models, and then says, this is what you want to do, right? And then it shows you a preview of it. It doesn't make you an expert. It makes it that you are as good as the world's best SQL programmer or SQL analyst, except you don't have to be. Leapfrog is there with you, giving you all of that power with zero training. That is revolutionary. People don't have the time to go spend years becoming experts in these. They need to have the capabilities of an expert without being an expert. Leapfrog doesn't replace you. It gives you bionic arms and legs so you can run and you can whip up data like an expert. You still have to know, hey, I'm heading in this direction, but Leapfrog tells you how to get there.
Yeah, you still
and that is remarkable.
Knowledge.
Yes, well, and so that's the part about what we've been focusing on is bringing in all of our expertise. We created a massive database of what do supply chain designers ask it to do? What tasks do you do? And then we've started by developing an incredible internal data set for what experts would do. And then we've used that to train the model. And now we've already rolled it out there. Everybody's got access to it. It's not in general release yet, but we've got early access to all of our customers, including our personal accounts people. And
Right.
every time people are throwing more questions at it, we're building up the data set. We anonymize it, so we don't know who you are, but we do know what kind of queries you're trying to do. This feeds back to the fact that since we're on a cloud platform, we can consolidate this. And the more that people use it, the better it gets until the entire design community it's not as bad as the weakest person. It's as strong as the best person. That is just the starting point. Model building and being able to use the software gets you in the ball game. The other two areas that we see in the future are around solving the missing data problem so that you never, ever have missing data. If I say I want to go into Europe, give me truckload LTL rates for Poland to Germany with this special category. If we don't have the data, Leapfrog ought to be able to go get that data for you. Okay, that's in a future version. And then finally, we see making sense of large output data sets that can be very, very tricky. Yeah, go ahead.
So as it stands then right now with the model that you have and that people have access to, what are the positive impacts? What are the benefits that supply chain professionals, teams, executives, organizations as a whole, like what can they expect to get from that? Because I think that's what everybody wants to know, right?
Yeah.
It sounds great and it sounds like it can help me. And I love the fact that maybe I don't need to be a super user to use it. But what will it do for me today?
Well, supply chain design analysts will see their project times shorten and the quality go up. So it is a double win because you get both. It takes a lot less time. Projects that might take you weeks to do, you can do in days. And what you're doing is at a higher quality level. When you learn how to leverage Leapfrog, you're learning how to use the power tool. You're learning how to use the power engine that can drive you faster. So shorter project time, more reliable, high quality models at the same exact time. Your junior folks will be outperforming your most experienced senior folks if they're using Leapfrog. That gets at that talent problem. So
Yeah, and that sort of brings me to another question. But before I do that, I just want to remind everybody because we've got about 20 minutes left. If you have a question, now is the time to put it in the comment section because we definitely want to get to all of your questions. We've brought up a lot of information and insights today. And if you have any questions, now is the time to do that. But on the trajectory of thinking about talent and skills, a lot of people are thinking about this right now, right? Like when we think about supply chain design, you've talked about its potential. What skills will be critical for supply chain teams, do you think, in 2025? And then how do you think AI will impact the skills? Now, you've talked about how humans and AI will work together to move it forward. But
Right.
what are the skills that people are going to need? And what are the skills that are going to be critical for supply chain teams in 2025?
Sure. So again, I'll focus on the supply chain design side of it.
Sure.
In terms of the skill sets, we've got a pretty set agenda, and we know what these, what that bundle of sets are, bundle of skills are. You've got to have data manipulation capabilities. You have to have software. You do have to have domain knowledge.
Mhm.
You have to know the business system enough to make sense of the data. And then you have to have there is a software piece to it. So being able to use, if you can use Excel, you can use supply chain design software. Cosmic Frog is our supply chain design flagship. If
You
you can
love
use Excel,
frogs, right? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but like Leapfrog and Cosmic Frog, I mean, frogs are kind of your thing.
okay. So without going through, we talked about this in a previous one. You know what you're doing here. Um, what we think is in design, it has to be fun. It
Mhm.
has to be fun because design without imagination is lame and won't work. We
Mhm.
must imagine new ways of doing things. And if you are too stiff or rigid or taking yourself too seriously, those environments are not conducive to getting your imagination engaged. We, as engineers, we have a tendency to focus on the problems we see today. In design, you have to have the imagination to think outside of the box, to be cliched about it. And what better way to do it than picking your spirit animal or saddling up and getting on a big frog and riding it out of the box. That'd
Is
be a
that
great.
your spirit animal? The frog's your spirit animal, isn't it, Don?
It is now, and I think it's everybody in design. It's your spirit animal, whether you know it or not. We all have the same
Okay.
one. So,
But
anyways,
going back
getting
to
back to
skills,
this.
I'm sorry. I had to
No,
do
no, no.
for a second.
We got to have fun. If this isn't fun,
Mhm.
we will be bad at our jobs, and also it's not fun.
Yeah.
Now, I just started banging out the sort of skill sets to empower an individual. What do you need as an individual to become a supply chain designer? And that's not all inclusive, but those are the main ones. Logical problem solving, ability with software, ability to work with data, communications, because you're going to have to interact with the rest of the organization, and also communicate what comes out of it. But that's the individual side. I really want us all to be thinking about design as a team sport, a
Sport.
team capability. Your people, in the past, we used to focus on, hey, once I get a person trained up, they'll just stay in that job, right? For the rest of their career.
No.
Doesn't happen.
No.
You're building design as a organizational capability, and it's a team, and the players are always changing. You have to design that in so that the capability exists, and people are moving in and out. And once you get that and you've got it thriving, it will outlast everybody. And now you've made a permanent improvement to your company. You've gotten it to evolve thinking. Systems
Mhm.
2 from the Kahneman thinking slow and fast. Your company can now step outside of itself and think about what supply chain it needs. And with that team approach, you can model it out, hang some numbers on it, and you're empowering your senior executives to make better balanced decisions. That's all a team thing. And when you get into how do I successfully run a team, for everybody that's out there, it's the fundamentals: good, solid management, set objectives, have a clear charter, know what kinds of how you're measuring success, run a process. So every time I do a project, I say, here's what I'm intending to do. Then later on, measure, did I achieve it? And how long did it take? You see the best companies out there, they know this, and they get better and better at running projects.
Mhm.
And that is them sharpening up their capability and making it professional.
Mm-hmm. So, Germain, I see your question. I want to get to that in just a minute. And a reminder, we are running out of time. So if you have a question, make sure to put it in the comments. Before we head to some of those questions, though, do you have a bit of a case study for Leapfrog that you can share with me? Because we've talked about a lot of different things, and I kind of want to bring it all together before we get to the audience questions. Do you have somebody who's used it? What did it mean for them? What was the ROI and benefits to them and their teams and their organizations?
So it's interesting. You know, I just pinged my team because remember we haven't launched this in a general release, so we have a lot of early users, and what we're seeing is anecdotally lots of people using it. Mm-hmm. The best case study I have is the guy I mentioned before, Steve Summer, our own VP. I asked him about this and he said, well, I was trying to do a project the other day and I couldn't remember how to do this, this, and this. And I started going on, using Leapfrog myself to do my own projects. Our team at OptiLogic, they're using Leapfrog on just about everything. And we see chopping these modeling times down, the turnaround for us when we need to do a demonstration model, it might have taken 3 or 4 days of work, and now they're doing it in 3 or 4 hours. There's this massive acceleration that we see. How do you measure that one? Because if I can do a project and I can shrink the time from 40 hours to, let's say, 8 hours, I can do it in a day.
That's a lot of time saved.
It's a massive time save. And then it allows me to spend more time generating new alternatives or redirect that time to analyzing and looking at the output. Right. So an ROI argument, there's one in there if you wanted to talk about pure cost savings, but we think of it that you're redirecting and spending your time thinking as opposed to trying to figure out and sort out a data problem.
Well, and I think we have to think about, you talked about measuring success. And I think about how we measure a leader at the current moment as to execution and, numbers and cost savings and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But I think that measurement of success has to be redefined. It not only has to be redefined from an ROI standpoint, because time does equal money. But it needs to be redefined from a leadership standpoint and what we're actually expecting people to do, having the tools that they do have to enable them to do the job. And so I think that's a really interesting point. It's like, you have to define what that success looks like. And then what is the measurement? It can't be that traditional KPIs and measurement that we've used in the past.
Yeah, well, you're quite right. And we are going to take our own medicine on this one. We have plans to go back and measure and survey and talk with our own users about is this helping you and how much? And we'll spin that up into here's a report on what it is. Because honestly, if it turns out it's only having a modest effect, then we know we need to focus on other areas. But I can tell you from what we've seen and from my own use of it, once you have access to a tool that can accelerate you and gives you a safety net, you just don't go back to the old way. I look at it that once you can leverage LLMs and AI to accelerate your productivity, then if you go to some other place and you have to use something else that doesn't have that, I just don't think you can do it. This is a one-way trip because once you get there, you're operating in a different way. And I'll give you one last example that relates to it. I find, I drove my car for many years without having GPS and without having routing and mapping on there. Now I'll use routing and mapping pretty much every time I get in the car, even if I know exactly where I'm going, because it shows me traffic, it gives me options. It might be go a different way. Can you think back and can you go get in a car that doesn't have it? And then you're like, where am I going again?
I may be the exception. I can read a map book and I can use maps to kind of get anywhere. So I think I'm the exception.
Just stop driving if you're going to consult your map book. I just imagine you're here going we need you, Sarah.
Because I grew up in sales. I mean, I spent years and years in sales using a map book.
You have the experts. So you're an expert. But if one of these up and coming folks who maybe doesn't have your driving skill, they need the GPS and they can go to a new town and they can get to locations just like an expert. That's a great way to think of this.
Mhm.
Every time you do a design project, it's like you're going into a town you've never been, and you have to go find a couple of obscure addresses and a place to park and a restaurant. How are you going to do that? You use AI as a
Yeah.
tool to help guide you through, like you were a lifetime expert of that new city. That is
Mhm.
exactly how folks are using Leapfrog right now, to make it like you have always been an expert in a town or a project you've never done before.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, using that map book took me way too long, and GPS is so much better. All right, let's get to audience questions. So,
Sure.
Jermon says, "How is AI improve also simulation in the supply chain design field?"
Well, simulation, good question. Simulation and optimization are different techniques. They use different types of data, but for us, our approach has been to harmonize and take one single data schema. So if you help that, you help all of the algorithms. Personally, I think what's going to happen is that while AI is assisting in the model building, especially in simulation, you get so much data on the output, it can be very, very hard to make sense of it. And really, simulation is at its strongest when you run lots and lots and lots of them. So one of the things we saw, Sarah, we pulled something called sensitivity at scale. On our Cosmic Frog platform, you can set up and run 1,000 scenarios in parallel, 1,000 simulations. When you think about how much data, time series for every SKU, for every one of those 1,000 variations, it can be it's impossible for a human to really make sense of that. We think that AI is going to be critical to making sense of what patterns do I see across the thousands of scenarios that I've run. But
Mm.
honestly, if you're using some of these legacy systems, it's not a question, because all you can do is hope that you can run one scenario.
Mhm.
In cloud-based technology, you run a whole bunch of them, and now the problem becomes making sense of the data. We love that, and it's early stages, but we're taking Leapfrog into output analysis as well. I think that's the biggest role it's going to play in simulation, in unlocking simulation as a tool.
I love that. And Jermon, I hope that that answered your question. If you have any other questions, you can always reach out to Don, I think, directly, right?
We love talking about this. We live
He
it.
loves talking about this. So reach
We
out
live
to him,
this.
send him a
Yeah,
DM on LinkedIn, or reach out to the OptiLogic
for sure.
team. Now, Don, I want to give you a moment to talk about, like, what is the one thing, or are there a few things that you want people to walk away from this discussion doing, thinking about, or planning? And before you say anything, I do want to remind everybody, because we have some people who have joined us a little bit later, that you can go and set up a free account for Leapfrog. And we've put the link in the comments for you to do that. We also have a link to an ebook, and we have a link to a demo as well. So go ahead and take action on those. Click on those links, because you're going to want to take advantage of that. Other than those three things, though, what do you want people leaving, planning, thinking about? Because we're heading into the end of 2024, we're going into 2025. Things are moving faster. We are learning so much more at a faster pace, and people are, quite frankly, feeling a tiny bit overwhelmed. So, what do you want people to leave this discussion thinking about, doing, planning, and all the things?
So the one thing I want you to think about is two things.
Okay, two things. I knew it. I was like, we
Thing
can't
number
just have
one.
one thing for Don.
So thing number one is, design is a capability that your company has to have to stay alive for the long term. It's
Mm.
not nice to have. It's not a side effect. If you get into you show up in the office in January 2025, and you or your executives don't have a clear strategy for what you're doing in supply chain design, who's responsible, who do they report to, what's our budget? If you don't have that, you are just waiting to be destroyed by your competitors or the environment, or both. It's
Mm.
irresponsible. You owe it to your company to have a design strategy and know what it is. The second thing is, we've focused a lot on AI, because AI is changing design. It's making it that the leaders are going to get further and further ahead faster, and the laggards are going to be stuck back over here at the starting line, never to get started at all. AI is increasing the pace. You have got to jump on this thing. Don't wait until January. Get working on this thing now, so that you get into January and you're implementing your plans. And then AI it's just a tool, but it is transforming these things to give folks that are successful with design can go even faster. You'll never catch them if you don't get started right now. And we work with a lot of companies, leading companies that are already very far ahead. We see where they're going. And for those companies that have this down, they are unafraid of the changing global environment. They view change and risk as an opportunity because they know how to handle it by redesigning their supply chain constantly. Contingency planning, looking ahead. If your company can't do that, you are already way back in the pack. You can't,
Right.
if you care, you can't afford to do that. You've got to get on board with design as a capability to survive and thrive in this crazy, chaotic world that we're looking at.
Yeah. Well, and I think also researching, like you said, research the future. What does that look like? The markets that you're buying from, the markets that you're selling into, that will give you a lot of information for you to be able to plan for the long term, even though some of us can only plan for the short term right now with the data that we have. And so you do need to get your data in order. And AI, I feel like it's just like a turbo boost, right? Like I go back to like Back to the Future, like
it doesn't replace these things, but it does make it that you can go faster. And chaos and deglobalization, the demographic shifts that are happening, it's wave after wave after wave. Design is the thing that lets you surf. You get on your surfboard and surf it with your frog on there. Okay, you're surfing the waves instead of just getting blown away by them. That is what that is how we serve our customers.
All right. Well, we're coming to the end. Germain has one last question, really quick, Don. How do you imagine Gen AI helping understand everyone in the company's insights from cost to serve and emissions to serve outputs? I don't know if you can answer that in 1 minute. If you can't, we'll get you two connected.
No, I'll take a good crack at it. What he's getting at is a really, really interesting problem, which is if you have people around the company who are actually able to query and get cost to serve, what you can learn is what are they thinking about? How are all the people looking at what questions are they asking? And imagine how valuable that is for the people who are making those systems to be able to have access to it. Within a company, you've got access to the entire organization's questions with generative AI. It gives them a way to do it. And then it's not that first pass, but it's the learning later that I think you can mine a lot of insight out of that one. It's a great point.
I love all the questions and everybody telling us where they've tuned in from. Now, again, OptiLogic has an ebook and a demo available that outlines everything we spoke about today. We've added the link to the comments for both of those, so go and check that out. But that brings us to the end of today's session. Don, it's always a pleasure. I mean, proactive data-driven supply chain design is something that I think every organization wants to pursue in an ideal world. But the reality is that time and skills are limited, right? So to have a tool like Leapfrog to make the supply chain design process easier, faster, and more effective, that's really priceless. So if you want to find out how Leapfrog can help you, head over to optilogic.com/leapfrog-AI. Thank you so much for everybody for joining us today, watching and commenting. We appreciate every single one of you. And Don, thanks again for joining me today. We'll see everybody soon.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody that's out there. Keep doing great things.